Hi, 7th period. I hope you're having a good day. The last time I read, Mr. Windsor was in the room and Molly had caught him in there and caught him off guard. And she was saying that I know you were just trying to keep your wife comfortable and take care of her. And he was saying, as a clerk's pay, he doesn't have enough money, but sometimes he would take care of her through speculation. So it says Molly knew that speculation was the sort of gambling men did with imaginary money, money they did not always have. She stared at the man cowering before her. How many times had she silently defended him, imagined him the victim of a cruel and unloving wife? But now, as Molly thought of Constance, unconscious in her bed, she knew who the real victim was. You didn't do wrong, sir. You might have done wrong, sir, but you did it for right reasons, she said, trying to hide the judgment from her voice. But I didn't do it. That's the problem. Market turned, investments went sour. I had to borrow more and more just to keep creditors at bay. The bank seized my accounts, our home, everything. That's when you came here, to the place where you grew up. I first thought of selling the land, he said, but when I returned to the house and I saw the door, I suddenly remembered everything. How my father's studies brought us here, how he built a house around the tree to keep it secret, and how one night me and my mother... He shook his head, warding off some horrible memory. What happened to him? Molly said softly. He smiled like he hadn't heard her. When I opened this door, I found something else. He held up a single coin. My wish. He clenched his fist around the coin, his expression turning to bitterness. I thought it could save us. You must understand. We had nowhere else to go. Molly did understand. She remembered being alone on the streets with Kip. She had been willing to do anything to get him away from that, including bringing him to the house that her every instinct told her was not safe. She folded her arms, warding off a shudder. How well the tree had known just what Master Windsor had needed, just what she had needed. They had, both of them, come to the tree in desperation. But had they just traded one evil for another? No matter what I do, things only get worse, he said absently. The debts, the loans, it's like an anaconda coiled around me, squeezing tighter and tighter. Molly stared at a thin branch protruding from the wall. It was indeed snake-like. We don't have snakes in Ireland, she said, a thought forming. A good saint chased them off long ago. Bertrand nodded, looking a little confused. I'd heard that. What we do got is lizards. She peered out the window, remembering. Lizards aren't snakes, but they can still bite. Worse, they're bad luck in a garden. So folks have an old trick for getting rid of them. What you do is wait till just before sundown, when the air's cool but the lizards ain't yet gone into their holes. You take a red-hot rock from the fire and set it in the middle of your garden. The lizards, why, they hate the cold, and they'll come running straight for that rock and curl straight up on top of it. Come morning, you'll wake to find them still on that rock, their bodies cooked alive. She turned back. You see, the rock saves them from chill only to kill them in its own way. Down the hallway, Molly heard a faint moan. She took a step toward Master Windsor and placed a hand on his shoulder. Sir, what your wife needs isn't jewels or money or even medicine. She nodded toward the open door. She needs the same thing as that lizard, to get out of the cold. She fixed her eyes on him, hoping the meaning of her story might sink in. You're right, he said. You're right. But Molly still wasn't sure he had understood her. Bertrand bent down and collected the remaining coins from the floor. He stuffed the money into his pockets. For the doctor, he said apologetically. He lowered his head and retreated into the hall. Molly felt a flood of emotions eddying inside of her, an overwhelming mixture of regret and shame. These were not just things she felt about Master Windsor. They were things she felt about herself. A light lapping of water broke the silence, and Molly caught the familiar smell of salt air. She turned around and saw that the knothole was no longer empty. It was filled with dark water. And floating on the surface was a new letter with her name on it. Molly took a step closer, seeing the careful script written in her mother's loving hand. It bobbed up and down, waiting for her. Chapter 35, A Spirited Debate. The mood at supper was grim. Even Alistair, who usually spent his meals happily taunting Penny, was silent. However, when Molly appeared at the hall with Kit behind her, he spoke up. "What's he doing here?" Now, Alistair," Bertrand said. "With all the chaos in the house lately, I could hardly expect Molly to prepare a separate meal for herself and her brother. He'll eat with us tonight." He smiled at Molly. "No need to stand on ceremony." Molly led her brother to an empty seat beside Penny. "It's very kind of you, sir." She nudged Kip with her foot. "Very kind," he repeated, though his attention seemed to be on the platter of steaming mutton on the sideboard, purchased courtesy of Hester's special discount. "Quite right," declared Dr. Crouch, tucking a serviette into his collar, indifferent to the mood of the family. "I've always said the only real difference between an Englishman and the most savage foreigner is their place of birth. That and brain size, of course. Just ignore Alistair," Penny whispered, scooting her chair closer to Kip. "He has a stomachache from eating too many chocolates." Molly rested Kip's crutch against the wall and set to serving the table. Since Mistress Windsor was too sick for travel, it had been decided that Dr. Crouch would remain at the house for a few days to monitor her condition. This meant more work for Molly, who had to manage a guest while still playing nursemaid to her mistress. It was a miracle that she had been able to pull off even a simple roast. Molly served mutton to everyone around the table. She noticed that Kip looked a little ashamed, perhaps ill at ease about being inside the house, and made sure to give him an extra big piece, with plenty of fat around the edges. Mistress Windsor, usually talkative during meals, was apparently feeling more somber tonight. Instead, the silence was filled by Dr. Crouch, who droned on in an almost ceaseless monologue on the finer point of his profession. "The thing that troubles me most," he said, already on his second helping, "is how many of my esteemed colleagues are still taken in by superstition and nonsense." He was one of those people whose speech could not be stopped by something so trivial as a full mouth. Why, just recently the Academy announced it would host a synopsis on the existence of the spiritual plane. Can you imagine such a thing? He rapped his wineglass and Molly rushed to fill it. "I simply cannot understand, a little more, my dear, how in this modern age forward-thinking men get hoodwinked into believing the unbelievable. Psychics and mediums, more like swindlers and mountebanks." Kip had apparently been listening more closely than the others. "So you don't believe in spirits?" he said from his plate. Dr. Crouch glanced up, looking equal part amused and annoyed. "I believe in the natural world, in empirical facts, my boy. Superstition is merely the reaction of the weak mind comforted with what it cannot fathom. Primitive men found spirits in every blade of grass and bush. Take that unusually large tree in front of your house, for example." Penny perked up. "Oh, it's a magic tree." Preposterous," Master Windsor cut her off. He smiled at the doctor. "I don't know where she would get such an idea." "But the child proves my point," Dr. Crouch rejoined. "In a less enlightened age, people would call the tree magic and make up a story. It would likely receive the same treatment as Homer Lotus's blossoms, or the proverbial Garden of Paradise, which, coincidentally, archaeologists now place in the outer regions of Persia. Hardly paradise, if you ask me." "Not all stories are made up," Kip said. Molly was unnerved to see that he was looking not at the doctor, but at her. She shot him a glare, warning him to watch his manners. "Of course stories are made up, my boy. Otherwise they'd be called facts. We in the modern age should know better than to believe in such flim-flam. Returning to our magic tree, clearly the surrounding soil provides a unique balance of nutrients that perfectly suit its nutritional needs." He propped a slice of roast in his mouth. "Much as my mutton suits mine." Kip seemed undeterred. What about good and evil?" he said. "Aren't they just made up too?" Dr. Crouch gave an amused chuckle. "It seems we have a little philosopher among us." He put down his knife and fork and folded his hands over his belly. "Young sir, please don't take me unreasonable. Don't think of me as unreasonable. Indeed, I am a slave to reason. The curious mind investigates all possibilities. I only ask for scientific rigor. If you say the spirit world exists, I say, show me your proof. And if one could produce such proof, why, he would find his name embezzled alongside the greatest minds in history. He stared above the table, his eyes shining at the thought of achieving such immortal glory. Bertrand clapped his hands together. All right then, he cried, apparently keen to change the subject. Who knows any good corkers? The remainder of the meal was unremarkable. Kit finished eating and retired to the stables to tend to Galileo. Molly cleared the table and set to preparing Dr. Crouch's room for the night. She made up the sheets, eyeing the portable medicine chest he had brought with him from town. It was filled with a vast array of notebooks and jars and shining scientific instruments, a traveling laboratory. She stared at the strange tools, wondering how they worked. Surely such marvelous equipment would be able to cure Mistress Windsor's sickness. She wondered if they could do more. Molly dropped her work and rushed to Mistress Windsor's room. She found Dr. Crouch at the bedside. He had a special glass tube called a thermometer inside Constance's mouth. He took it out and examined some numbers at the end. Well, that's not right, he muttered, frustrated, and put the glass back in her mouth. All right, I'm going to stop there. I'll be back tomorrow. I hope you have a great day.